Hey YouTube, it's Enigma here. So this is our second session in Road to Cat VARC series. So this is a sociology based RC, and as usual I will provide the PDF of the session in the comment section below, so you can try the RC yourself and then you can look at the solutions. Urbanization and changing physical environment are poor explanation for rising crime rates in developed countries after the 1960s. By the 1960s, the countries under consideration were already industrialized, urbanized societies. There was no sudden shift from countryside to city that began in 1965. So the earlier two lines set the tone of the passage that urbanization and changing physical environments are not the reason. They are actually poor explanation that why crime rates in rising in developed countries after the 1960s. Then authors provide a supporting detail to this, that by the 1960s the countries that were under consideration, like that, you can say that these countries were not urbanized, and after that they become urbanized and the crime rates grew up. It was not actually like that, because the countries that were under consideration, they were already industrialized and urbanized societies, and there was actually no sudden shift which you are hoping for, like from countryside to city occurs, and that's why crime rates begins to rise. This is not like that. This is being mentioned here. In the United States, murder rates are much higher than in the south than in the north, despite the fact that the latter tends to be more urban and densely populated. So this is a supporting detail which is provided, that in the USA there are two areas, south and north, and you can say in south the crime rates are exceptionally higher, although north is, you can say, is urban and populated area. So you can say, although north is densely populated, but the crime rates are not higher here but in south. So what's the so this is a supporting argument to, you can say, to this is a supporting detail for author's argument that urbanization is not the reason that the crime rates are soaring up. Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, and Singapore are among the most densely populated, overcrowded urban environments in the world, and yet they did not experience rising crime rates. So he is providing another supporting key detail for bolstering his argument that you can even see in Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, and Singapore also. These are densely populated areas, but and overcrowded as well, but they did not experience rising crime rates. So you can say urbanization and densely populated areas are not the key reason for rising crime rates. Author has established this firm's image in our mind. Indeed, if we are able to believe Jane Jacobs' account of crime is inversely proportional to the number of eyes on the street, precisely the sorts of urban conditions said to breed crime, including crowded sidewalks and mixed use neighborhoods, are for her exactly the reasons that crime is low in neighborhoods with plentiful social capital. So, author is definitely introducing a new idea here, that is social capital. Author says if we are to consider that if we are to consider Jane Jacobs' account of crime as that, like crime is actually inversely proportional to the number of eyes on the street. That if there is high amount of crime, then you can say there are less eyes on the street, and if there is less eyes on the street, there is high amount of crime. That's the hypothesis that Jane Jacobs has made. Precisely the sorts of urban conditions which are said to breed crime. She has actually said that urban conditions breed crimes, including crowded sidewalks and mixed use neighborhoods, are for her exactly the reasons that crime is low in neighborhoods with plentiful social capital. Then author debunks this myth, and he says that crime is low in neighborhoods which have plentiful social capital. We are back, in other words, to the social capital argument. Crime increases because the social capital of a neighborhood or a society decreases, and vice versa. So author says that crime is actually inversely proportional to social capital. That is the main point that the author has made. If a social capital of a neighborhood decreases, then crime increases, and if the social capital of a neighborhood increases, then crime decreases. This is the argument that the author is making. So by the very first paragraph, we can clearly say that the author is not fond of the idea that urbanization is contributing to rising crimes. He provides supporting details that this is not the case, and then he goes against the sort of phenomena that has been mentioned by Jane Jacobs, that Jane Jacobs said that crime is inversely proportional number of eyes on the street. It's not specifically like that. It's actually social capital that's the key important characteristic here. Another explanation is sometimes euphemistically labeled social heterogeneity. That is, in many societies, crimes tends to be concentrated among racial or ethnic minorities. Authors point out another point here is that sometimes euphemistically labeled social heterogeneity. Euphemistically, you can say euphemism. Euphemism is the way that you don't say offensive things. You don't, instead of saying my cat died, you say my cat passed away. That is euphemism. So another explanation is sometimes euphemistically labeled social heterogeneity. So author says that social heterogeneity is also a key factor, that is an explanation that in many societies crimes tend to be concentrated among racial or ethnic minorities. So author says that in many societies crime is actually concentrated in racial or ethnic minorities. The reason that crime rates are frequently higher among minorities is very likely related to the fact that legitimate avenues of social mobility are blocked for them in ways that are not true for members of majority community. So it says that the reason why you can say in the crimes is actually concentrated in racial or ethnic community, the reason is actually because of you can say uh, the fact that uh, the author says that the reason that crime rates are actually the frequency of the author states that the reason that another explanation is sometimes euphemistically labeled social heterogeneity. What is euphemism here? Euphemism is the act of saying, instead, if I said that my cat has died, rather than saying that, I will say my cat is passed away. So using less severe words to convey something is called euphemism. So another explanation is sometimes euphemistically labeled social heterogeneity. So author explains that another explanation or to the increasing crime rate can be social heterogeneity, that in many societies crimes tend to be concentrated among racial or ethnic minorities. Author says that this is reason because in many societies crime is actually concentrated towards a racial or ethnic minority. The reasons that crime rates are frequently higher among minorities is very likely related to the fact that legitimate avenues of social mobility are blocked for them in ways that are not true for members of majority community. So author says that one of the reasons that the crime is actually concentrated in a ethnic minority is because the venues for social mobility, like the resources or the social mobility that a major community has are not there for a social minority, you can say, or ethnic minority. That is the reasons that crime occurs in these communities as well. In other cases, the simple fact of heterogeneity in itself may be to blame. So author says in other case, this is one case, and in other case, simple fact of heterogeneity, that you belong from a different race or ethnicity, is the reason for increase of crime. Neighborhoods that are too diverse culturally, linguistically, religiously or ethnically never become together as communities able to enforce informal norms on their members. So this is also a reason, because if a neighborhood is, you can say, is too diverse culturally or linguistically or religiously or ethnically, they actually never come together as communities because they are not able to enforce informal norms on their members. So this is specifically a reason. A further exploration has to do with the drugs. Based on the maturing of the baby boom cohort alone, as we would have expected the decline in crime to occur in the late 1980s rather than in the late 1990s. So this is now an interesting concept here, that like the author introduces an angle of drugs here. He says that based on the maturing of the baby boom cohort alone, we should have expected the decline in the crime to occur in the late 1980s rather than in the late 1990s. So what it's meaning here is that author is using age curve here. Author is specifically mentioning here that the majority of crime rates are done in the young, or you can say adulthood. So if the population is from, you can say, 1946 to 1964, for example, because I am using this age rate because of the specific reasons that the age is provided here in 1965. 1960s is the main questioning here. So if example, assume that any adulthood age is 24 or 25 years old, if they are causing crime in 1964, but when it comes to 1980s they would have grown into adults, so crime rate would have declined, but it didn't occur. So isn't it? So is that one explanation for the continuation of high levels of violent crime and for the sudden rapid drop in the rates in 1990 has to do with the introduction of crack cocaine in American cities in the mid 1980s and the subsequent stabilization of crack markets. So although if you are saying, if you are just considering the age parameter, then obviously the majority of the crime are being done, you can say, with the in young, or you can say in, you can say, adulthood, isn't it? But if somebody is born in between 1960s, let's say, by the end of the 1980, he would have become a, you can say, a 30 or 40-year-old man, for example we are taking. So the crime rates would have been declined, but it was not so. The decline was not in 1980s but in 1990s, and this is because of introduction of drugs. and crack cocaine. So because of that, that steep decline which should have occurred in 1980 was prolonged to 1990s. This factor does not, however, explain the reason for the initial growth of crime, only the crime waves prolongations. And author is specifically keen here. It says this does not, this factor, that is, introduction of drugs, explains the reason for the initial growth of crime. That, why crime should have been stopped in 1980s, but it went on to 1990s. So it only explains the reason for initial growth of crime. It doesn't explain the reason for initial growth of crime, but it explains why the crime waves prolonged, from 1980 to 1990. Prolongations, the reason of prolongation is being explained by this statement. The current dominant school of contemporary American criminology holds that early childhood socialization is one of the most important factors determining the level of subsequent criminality. So, a key crux of information is here that, one organization is mentioned, the current dominant school of contemporary American criminology. The view of contemporary American criminology has been discussed here. It holds that early childhood socialization is like very important in determining the level of subsequent criminality. So, the childhood that you are having, the socialization that you're having in your childhood is key, a very key important factor in determining the subsequent criminality that a person is gonna subsequent criminality. The vast majority of people obey the law, particularly with regard to serious offenses, out of habit that they learned relatively early in life. So, author is saying that if a person is obeying, a vast majority of people actually learns to obey the law early in the life. So that's why they keep on obeying the law at the end of the life also. But by contrast, most crimes are committed by repeat offenders who have failed to learn this basic level of self-control. Author states, but by contrast, you can say if somebody has not learned this state of control by in his early childhood, they will keep on repeating the same, you can say, crime, or they will keep off committing the crimes in case they are not acting rationally but out of impulse. Author says that in many cases they are actually not acting rationally but they are out of impulse. It is more useful to speak of criminal careers rather than individual acts of crime, since life courses were established by the way parents socialize their children at relative early ages. So the author introduces a new aspect here, that by the way parents socialize their children at the relatively earlier ages is a very key crux of information. Like how criminal careers were decided is actually being influenced by the way parents socialize their children at relatively early ages. A comprehensive survey of studies linking family to crime confirmed that parents influence their children's subsequent criminal behavior through neglect, conflict with the child, deviant behavior on the part of the parents themselves, and marital conflict and parental absence. So this is also a key crux of information that the author is providing, that a comprehensive survey of studies is occurring, and it states by the way the parent actually socialized with their children, whenever they have the conflict with the child or whenever they have deviant behavior of the part of the parent themselves, and marital conflict can influence criminal mentality, or you can say development of a criminal mentality into the children, and they're much more likely to commit crimes. So this is the paragraph itself. So this is, I will say, pretty straightforward paragraph. There is nothing we can say very much complex onto it. So let's go on to the questions. Which of the following statement best reflects the main argument of the first paragraph of the passage? The main argument of the first paragraph of the passage, as we have studied, is you can say urbanization is not the reason for the increasing crime rates, and not everything can be blamed to urbanization, because you can say urbanization was already having occurred in those cities, and they were already modern, and it was not the reason for the increasing crime rates. That's the author is making, and it is because of the decline of the social capital that crime rates have been increasing in the neighborhoods. So this is probably the main argument of the passage. Urbanization and changing physical environment sufficiently explain the rising crime rates in developed countries after the 1960s. So this is you can say completely against what the author has said. So first is definitely not the answer. Criminal rates in developed countries after the 1960s are primarily influenced by the decline in social capital. This is exactly what the author has said, though this is preferably the answer. Let's check further. The higher rates of the crime in southern United States compared to the north can be attributed to more widespread urbanization. Widespread urbanization is not the thing that is in question here. So this is probably not the answer as well. Urban factors perceived to foster crime, like crowded sidewalks and mixed use neighborhood, contribute to lower crime rates. This is not even this is not even addressing the main argument. So this is definitely not the answer. So the answer is second. According to the author, the increase in crime rates due to social heterogeneity can be explained by. So, what is the author's take on social heterogeneity? An increase in crime rate with social heterogeneity. This was mentioned in In this paragraph, the author's take on social heterogeneity was that the crime rates are specifically concentrated among racial or ethnic minorities. This is because of that the major community has a social mobility that the minor community lacks, and the act of itself being a heterogeneous is to the blame. The author has stated that because if a culture is way too diverse, then they are not able to, you can say, remain coherent. That's the specifically take of an author. So let's look at the questions. According to the author, increase in crime rates due to social heterogeneity can be explained by first, the direct connection between crime rates and the intense discrimination prevalent in development countries. No, it's not because that there is a racial discrimination. Racial discriminant is common. That's not the reason that crime rates are occurring. Let's look at the second. The formation of cohesive minority communities based on cultural, language, religion, or ethnicity. This is completely opposite to it. We are not. The author has stated that act of itself being a minor community is it's a problem because they are not cohesive enough because they are diverse. So this is also completely wrong. The observation that crime concentration is linked to specific racial or ethnic minority neighbors. This is exactly the correct statement that the author is trying to portray. The author has stated that crime concentration is linked to specific racial or ethnic minorities. So this is probably the correct answer. Then we go on to the fourth. The suggestion that implies crime rates have a strong correlation with population density. This is completely irrelevant because we have stated that population density is not the one which you can say indicates the increase of crime rates. Which statements best describe the relationship between the baby boom cohort and the crime rates during the 1980s and 1990s? So we have already been discussed this questions in the earlier paragraph in great detail. We know that author has introduced an age, you can say, explanation towards the very end of the paragraph. You can say in this. This is the paragraph where the authors mention this, and the drugs has been mentioned here. The use of the drugs has been specifically mentioned here is that if we say if the age is the only reason that you can say if you are only considering the age factor, then the person who were born in 1960 by the end of 1980 they would have reached a full grown adulthood. So the age of the crime should be declined, but it's not so. Why? Because drugs were introduced. So because of the drugs, that 1980 the period of crime rather than declining in 1980s, it got prolonged to 1990, and after 1990 it got declined. So this is the probable cause between, you can say, baby cohorts, between the baby boom cohort and crime rates. So the baby boom. So let's look at the answers. The baby boom cohort's maturation led to an immediate decline in crime rate in the late 1990s. No, it's not specifically the reason. Immediate decline in crime rates in 1990s. There is, you can say, there was no immediate decline. No? There was prolongation. After 1980, there was prolongation of crime. Then came to a decline. The introduction of crack cocaine in mid 1980 caused the baby boom cohort to be more prone to criminal behavior. It's not specifically related to baby boom cohort to be more prone to criminal behavior. It's not said that those individuals which are from 1960 to 1980 they were committing more criminal behavior because drugs were instituted. It was not specifically related onto it. So this is like a clever misdirection. This is not the main crux or essence of the paragraph. This is actually one of the key ideas that the question setters place. They have actually put this as a cause, as this an effect, a wrong causal effect. The introduction of crack cocaine in mid 1980s caused the baby boom cohort to be more prone to criminal behavior. It's not specifically like to that. They were already committing criminal behavior. It's not like they, because of, you can say, crack cocaine, they started committing more criminal behavior. So this is a clever misdirection. This is a wrong causal effect. Third, the decline in the crime rates anticipated in the 1980s due to the aging of the baby boom cohort occurred only in the late 1990s, and this is exactly what the passage has said. That we expected the decline to occur in 1980s, but the decline occurred in 1990. That is the thing. The decline in the crime rates anticipated in 1990 due to aging of the baby boom cohort occurred only in the 1980s. This is the precise information that the passage is making. Fourth, the baby boom cohort young adults in the late 1980s had no discernible influence on the crime rates throughout the 1980s. This is completely false. If this is true, then the passage falls itself on its face. So definitely we can say third is the correct answer towards this question. Fourth, all of the following statement, if false, which means say negative, would be seen as being in accordance, which means positive, with the passage except negative. So the chain becomes negative, positive, negative. So negative, negative. So in turns, we have a positive. Okay. So we need a statement which is positive with the paragraph. Changing physical environment due to urbanization does not explain rise in crime. This is specifically what author has said, that just because urbanization is occurring doesn't mean that the crime rates are been uh, does not explain rise in crime, because urbanization is not, just because urbanization is occurring, crime rates, it's not the reason for increasing crime rates. That's exceptionally what the passage has said. Social heterogeneity plays no role in the crime rates among racial or ethnic minorities. This is wrong, because we know social heterogeneity plays a critical role in increasing crime rates. The presence of social capital in neighborhood has no influence on crime rate. This is also wrong. This is specifically mentioned in the passage. Fourth, the relationship between family and crime is unrelated to parental behavior. This is also wrong, because the passage has stated clearly that the relationship between family and crime is definitely related to parental behavior, because if parent is, you can say, negligent in their duties, or there is marital conflict, they can cause, you can say, increase probability of criminal mentality in a child. That's been specifically mentioned here. So the answer to this question is first statement.